Okay, guys, I'm here with Calvin Kim. We're here at Bitcoin Seoul 2024. Calvin's actually one of the organizers of this conference. So yeah, let's chat a little bit about it. What are your thoughts on how it's gone so far, and what's your first initial reactions?
So for me, I did a lot of the initial planning where my role was mostly like contacting speakers from abroad and like sponsors from abroad. And so for myself, it's just a lot of communications. I wasn't really involved in operations, so like those guys were dying. And so I think they did a really good job, and I'm having fun here.
Great. And what do you think it means for the scene here in Korea? Is there going to be more of a Bitcoin message as opposed to a shitcoin or crypto message?
That's what we're hoping, and people, there aren't any Bitcoin conferences here in general, and so like there's a lot of like blockchain, and what my hope was that we could get people together here and we could make new connections, and so like we'll get something started. Like that could be a software, like open source projects, or it could be like just like product. Or like I want people to connect, like locals with locals, as well as like locals with the visitors, and so hoping to get some network effects going here.
Great. And you are also the lead now of Utreexo. So I know there is you've just recently put out a Utreexod. So I guess, again, we'll take a step back. We'll try and make it accessible. So the point of Utreexo is that you can quickly onboard a node and let's say decrease the download requirement. Can you just maybe explain that to make it accessible for people? What is Utreexo?
Right, Utreexo is just a collection of Merkle trees. It's like a fancy collection of Merkle trees. And what it means for the end user is that your node is smaller. And one of the features that we could have, because the node is smaller, is that you could sync up immediately when you have to download the binary. And so for the end user, what this means is that when you have a Bitcoin wallet, like any other like software wallet or like app wallet, you download it and it has a full node included in it. And so you're validating blocks, you're validating transactions. So it'll be easier to have more like a trustless system without the current the UX burdens.
Yeah. And so let's say the user, like hypothetically in the future, is using some kind of Utreexo-based wallet, and they use this to quickly sync up. Do they then have to also download new blocks to stay in sync with the chain, or is it like downloading a new Utreexo proof?
So yeah, they would also have to download the block as well, and so because they'd be fully validating everything, but then they would also be downloading the proof as well, and so it'd be downloading the block and the proof.
Okay. And so then do you see that making it viable for like a mobile phone or maybe for like a desktop computer like app to quickly onboard? Like what's the main use going to be?
So yeah, I do see that as like as a bottleneck for people in some countries, but really like for open source software, like you build it for yourself and you hope that other people also get value out of it. And so for myself, I live in South Korea, and we get gigabit up and downs on the subway. So I think the people here are really going to love it.
Gotcha. And so now you recently released Utreexod. So can you explain what that is?
So Utreexod is just a full node implementation that has the Utreexo accumulators built in, and so it supports like every single operation that needs to be supported. It supports every single feature, and so it's just a feature complete full node implementation with Utreexo accumulators.
Great. Yeah. And so that is also with BTCD. So can you explain a little bit about using BTCD?
Right. And so like for most people, when they're using Bitcoin or when they're running a node, they'll probably use Bitcoin Core. And Bitcoin Core is the original client that Satoshi wrote that's continuously being developed. And so like Bitcoin itself is just a protocol, it's just an idea. And so it doesn't need to be Satoshi's client. And so BTCD is originally authored by a group of other guys, and it was completely re-implementation of the Bitcoin protocol in a language called Go. Bitcoin Core is in C++, BTCD is in Go. And one of the other things was when we first got started, Taj, who originally started the Utreexo, they wrote the paper, had the first code base out there. That was all in Go, and so it made sense to also use an implementation of Bitcoin that was in Go.
Gotcha. Yeah. So do you see it then that people might, as an example with, let's say the Umbrals and the Raspberry Blitzers of the world, these node packages, that they might also integrate some form of Utreexo to quickly onboard the user?
That's what we're hoping for. And I've not had the chance to talk to them as much as I should be. And so, yeah. in the coming months, I'll be trying to talk to more wallets, more node in the box companies.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so also the other interesting thing is you've mentioned it would be a very small download requirement to just get started. Could you explain a little bit about how that works for people?
Oh, right. And so those of you that are familiar with something like Assume Utreexo, that means that at a certain block, you have like the hash commitment of the Utreexo set. And so what that means is that you could start validating the next block from that on. So why can't you validate like block 800,000? That means because you don't have the UTXO set at block 799,999, you cannot validate block 800,000. And so if we just provide the UTXO set at that height, you could validate the block immediately after that. And so with Utreexo is just another way to represent the UTXO set, and we could represent them very compactly. And so with something like Utreexo, you can have the entire UTXO set represented when you download the binary. So everything is included, and you just start off at something like block 800,000.
Great. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes, guys. Check out Utreexod. And Calvin, thanks for joining me.
All right. No, thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. We're back at Bitcoin Seoul 2024. I'm here with Gloria Zhao. She is a Bitcoin Core maintainer, one of a few, not the only one. And she's also at Brink, or a Brink grantee.
Yes.
And Gloria, you focus on the mempool, so I know that's your specialty, let's say.
Yeah.
I know there've been some updates on the what was called V3, but is also now called Truc, or TRUC. So can you just explain that for us?
Yeah, so I mean, V3 was just an implementation detail. You set your transaction version to 3 to use it, but topologically restricted until confirmation is a bit more of a descriptive name. So that's the name that I gave it. And now it's also known as BIP 431, which was just merged a couple days ago. And so it's basically meant to be a way to opt into policies that should, in my opinion, be the default. And it gives you kind of more robust fee bumping, better guarantees. It lets you use 0 fee transactions that you can then CPFP. That will now propagate using transaction package relay. We have one parent, one child package relay. It's a subset of kind of, general any package relay. But it is a very, very useful one. So now, just to clarify what that means, you can have a 0 fee pre-signed transaction or any transaction CPFP'd by a child transaction that pays its fees. We're working on package RBF for those 2 packages to be able to replace each other, which should be really, really useful for Lightning. They're currently talking about how to upgrade to using Truc transactions. So it's all very exciting. There's kind of this new energy and protocol development that's come about from, I guess, new BIP editors and just, I think, new energy and a lot of things. Yeah.
So let's just talk a little bit about the implication, as you mentioned. So the implication here is you can opt into this V3 regime, or Truc, TRUC regime. And the idea is that, let's say, Lightning protocol guys might be interested in this because they can design their channels in a slightly different way and have like a 0 fee anchor output. And then now they can, instead of having to attach sats to that, they can have a 0 fee and then bump it later. Is that the...
Yeah, so that would be with ephemeral anchors. But yeah, if you had any anchor, which is, how anchor outputs exist today in Lightning, which is just a place for you to be able to add a child to do a CPFP. Yeah, and so you wouldn't need to kind of negotiate fee rates to put on that commitment transaction and potentially overpay, which is what typically happens. You just need to pay pretty much exactly what you need in order to get your thing confirmed. You can RBF the child, and so yeah, I think it should save money. It should make the cost of running those Lightning nodes
maybe
lower.
Arguably make it a bit more predictable for the user.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and you won't have a forced close because the fee rates went up and much higher than what you had signed your commitment transactions with.
Interesting. And then when it comes to non-Lightning uses, would you see uses here for just standard on-chain users, like maybe some kind of vault implication or some kind of just general user?
Yes, absolutely. So if vaults, yes, absolutely. So there's a lot of vault designs with or without the kind of covenant proposals that people are talking about. And they all kind of rely on, okay, I pre-signed this thing. It's going to have fees added to it for when I broadcast it later. And so, yeah, this would be a really good application for that, because now you wouldn't have to think about it. You just 0 fees. I'll just add the transaction fees when I broadcast.
And this comes to that problem we were saying earlier, that in these kind of L2 contracting and some vault things, you kind of either have to pre-shoot the fee or pre-estimate the fee, and that's
Yeah.
hard. Obviously, it might be a year in advance.
Yeah.
And now you don't have to. You can kind of take away some of that requirement.
Exactly. So this should be a money saver at worst, right?
Yeah. Right.
And a security
Yeah.
thing.
And so the part that we got recently is, I guess, like a piece of this overall puzzle, right? Like it's in a specific context of was it a one input and one output, or like what is that?
Yeah. So this kind of, I can also talk about cluster mempool, but kind of the way that mempool is architected right now and the permissiveness of a lot of policies is pretty free for all. Like originally it was, you can spend unconfirmed outputs and attach transactions, and you end up with these gigantic clusters of transactions, and we have all these heuristics that we use to estimate, like, for example, is this replacement better than the thing that it's replacing? And with kind of further research that Suhas and Peter and a few others have done, we've discovered that a lot of the replacements that we do or don't do are the wrong decision because of all these heuristics that we have. And the topology restrictions are way more permissive than what people normally use.
Yeah.
Normally people are, at most sending a transaction. If it doesn't confirm, they'll replace it, or maybe they'll CPFP.
Quick question on that. So are these applying at a transaction level or at an input level, or how's it working?
It's at a transaction level.
Okay.
Well, it's a topology restriction as well. So like multiple transaction level as well. So in practice for a user, it'd be like, you're trying to spend the second transaction in a chain of transactions.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you had a transaction, maybe you spent the unconfirmed change, and then you're trying to spend it again.
Yeah. Gotcha.
In a third transaction, it's like you can't do that. However, the benefits you get are just more robust fee bumping.
Okay. Gotcha.
And we can do this without cluster mempool already.
Gotcha.
So we have kind of short-term and long-term. Long-term, we're totally revamping mempool to be able to handle all these cases.
Gotcha.
But short-term, you can opt in to the better, more restrictive, but you're probably never going to hit up against the limits, and it's going to work better.
Gotcha. And then can you explain kind of for us ADIQs, what is mempool cluster and what's the point of this?
Yeah, so it's the long-term solution to kind of what I just described, where the mempool data structure is tracking packages, but it's very limited in what it's doing.
Okay.
And so what we'd like to do is completely restructure that so that, for example, here's one of the benefits that you get today. When you want to create a block template for the next block that you're going to mine as a miner, you're going to have to calculate that on the fly. So you go into your mempool, you grab the highest, by ancestor score, and then you build that over time. And that's a kind of computationally complex thing to do. Whereas what we could do is have the entire mempool sorted the entire time. So when a new block comes in, you update it, boom, you have your next block template like that. Instead of having to spend those extra, few milliseconds or tens of milliseconds, or, it could be quite a long time when mempools are full and you have a very large one, and it's very, it'll be a lot faster. And that makes all of the algorithms much more efficient and more accurate. So like I said before, when we're calculating replacements, we can very accurately assess, is this a better transaction, incentive compatibility wise for the miner that they would mine. And so for users, we're hoping that you'll basically see no impact, because again, nobody is really hitting up against the limits. It's just that we need to design these algorithms with bounds to them. So for you as a user, you're probably seeing no difference, but a lot of things are going to work better.
Okay.
And this is a very long-term kind of mempool rewrite.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. One other thing, I know you're focused on P2P.
Yeah.
I know in V27 of Bitcoin Core, we've now got the new V2 peer-to-peer layer encryption. I saw it in my terminal. I've started to connect to V2 peers now. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so V2 is basically opportunistic encrypted transport. So when you connect to another peer on the network, you're going to have an encrypted connection instead of all of that being in plain text. So it used to be that basically a observer, like your ISP, could see the messages that were being sent between nodes. And that could be a way for people to eavesdrop and gain kind of insight into, for example, which is the first node that talks about this transaction. And that's one of the many privacy improvements that are being worked on in the peer-to-peer layer. Another one, I guess this isn't 27, this is like less recent. But for example, now we see more and more nodes that don't connect on port 8333,
Okay.
and which would be in the past a way to detect like, oh, that's a Bitcoin node. Like, oh, I see a lot of traffic going to this port 8333. That's probably a Bitcoin node. And so that gives you away. And this is, two
Okay.
examples.
Another way to sort of hide in a different crowd, let's say.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so zooming out of P2P, just like Bitcoin Core in general, what other kind of projects are on that people should be, aware of?
I would say that we have a few projects that we're very excited about that maybe again aren't as user facing, such as the wallet migration. So descriptor wallets have been around for years now, and we're still trying to make sure that all those legacy wallets migrate. We're still working on kernel, but it's becoming more and more mature. Kernel is our way of trying to extract the consensus engine into its own module so that we can, for example, understand and test consensus better and potentially create alternative clients, so that it's not all bundled in with like the wallet and the GUI being in the same exact piece of software as your consensus engine. That modularization, we're doing a lot of fuzzing, a lot of testing. So these are, I think, all kind of maybe not really user-facing things. But silent payments is something that Bitcoin Core, the wallet team, is working a lot on. That's a pretty exciting way for people to kind of have your cake and eat it too, in terms of privacy and having a static payment code. Cluster mempool is another one. I'm working on various like censorship-resistant transaction relay things. So kind of like people trying to kind of stop packages or transactions from being gossiped between peers. It might be a little too much of a sausage, but various small things going around all around the repo. And I recently did a series. Okay, here, Softworks. People like to talk about Softworks, right? I recently did a series of PR review clubs for software proposals, including the 64-bit arithmetic, which on top of that would be in-out amount and TILA, as well as Opcat, and there's TX hash, like all those things. We did a series of review clubs for their Inquisition PRs. Like right now, I think is like a really good testing phase. So Inquisition or Signet now has like CTV, APO, and as well as these softworks that may or may not be in by the time that I'm saying this, and it's out there for people to build applications, build wallets, create chess transactions, and kind of feel out the ergonomics of using each of these new kind of script primitives.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks for the update, and I'll put the links in the show notes. We'll put the link for the Truc BIP and maybe the review club as well. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices, such as the Coldcard Mark IV and the new Coldcard Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card. This show also brought to you by mempool.space, the leading Bitcoin and blockchain visualizer. I use it all the time when I'm checking transaction fees and trying to understand what is the state of Bitcoin's mempool. You can search transactions, historical as well as unconfirmed ones, and also see a great way to visualize things across the Lightning Network, Liquid, mining, and so much more. Also, for those of you with an enterprise, they offer a mempool.space enterprise program. So for those of you as part of that enterprise program, you might want to get increased API limits, and you might want to have increased access to the team in terms of feature requests. You might want to have special branding in terms of how your custom instance of mempool.space looks. So to sign up for that, go to mempool.space/enterprise. And now, back to the show.
All right, we're back at Bitcoin Seoul 2024. I'm here with Laolu, aka Roastbeef, the CTO of Lightning Labs. So Laolu, I know you guys are just coming out with Taproot Assets. So do you want to just give us a bit of a quick overview? What's the latest there?
Cool. Yeah, the latest is, it's been on mainnet for probably over a year now, but it was still sort of like a little bit earlier. And I think people were really waiting for was basically, it in channels, which is sort of like one of the unique propositions. And actually in the last month, we've done like a series of demos, sort of like number one, showing sort of like paying any Bitcoin invoice, like a normal Lightning invoice with like my asset on the other side. Also allowing individuals to like, give me a Bitcoin invoice and they're receiving, some other stablecoin or asset. And then also like a swap demo as well. It's basically showing some of the different capabilities. I think one thing that was very important is that like we wanted to make sure like, any wallet could actually pay the invoice, right? So the invoices are actually fully denominated in Bitcoin, right? So even if someone's receiving Euro or some other stablecoin or USD, whatever else, they're still denominating in Bitcoin, which I think is sort of like an interesting concept. Because people always talk about like, the medium of exchange unit of account, kind of like, barriers across. And in this case, because the unit of account of Lightning Network is Bitcoin, it's Bitcoin for this as well too. So it's kind of think it's pretty interesting. It also like simplifies things a lot because now you don't necessarily need to worry about a bunch of different, pairs of asset, sort of like, quotes. You basically just have Bitcoin there. So I'm very excited about that. We definitely have a version on mainnet, this summer, very soon. Finish some code. The team's really working, really hard on this right now. So really excited to like get the stuff out there and just fully start to iterate on it.
Okay, yeah. So let me just try and explain I'm an ADIQ, so let me just explain it. I'm for the grug brains. So it's like you just pay a normal Lightning invoice, but the other guy on the other side, he might in the background kind of set it so that he receives it in, let's say he wants dollars because he's a fiat, fiat person. Whereas us Bitcoiners, we prefer Bitcoin, but the idea is you as a Bitcoin Lightning user don't have to care. The other guy, he can set his own thing. And this is something that, let's say the merchant as an example, or the exchange or someone, and then they would work with, in my understanding here, you correct me if I'm getting this wrong, it's like you would have like an LSP who supports Taproot Assets as an example. And let's say there's, I don't know, Taproot Assets Tether, like as an example. And they run, so then the LSP kind of has a special channel with the merchant, but the end user who's paying, he doesn't have to care about that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing as well is that like, if you don't want to use this stuff at all, like you don't have to do anything, right? And so for example, let's say you're a routing network in just like routing node in the greater Lightning Network itself. Maybe one day you're like, oh, I'm having more volume. What's going on? Well, you don't really need to care. You can just sort of like, worry about your own operation. Okay, let me add additional capital and things like that. So it's purely like an opt-in update. It's also, purely at the edges as well too. And then even the other way around, like let's say someone wants to pay you in Bitcoin, right? And they're, sending some other thing at the end, they're using some other stablecoin. Well, they're paying you whatever they have, but you're getting Bitcoin at the end of the day, right? And then so the way it works, like you're saying, there's this sort of like, edge nodes that basically help to, do that, that transaction basically across the other edges, right? So, and the way it works is, so one thing people always ask also is like, they ask like, oh, what about like all of the fees, right? What about the prices and things like that? Like, how is that going to actually manifest? What's interesting in that, like, you don't really need to worry about that, right? So typically a Lightning wallet has like a fee limit, right? It's okay, well, I will spend up to 0.2% or 1% basically, and below that, they'll find another route to satisfy that. So it'd be similar to this. So now, like, typically on Lightning, each hop is already adding a little fee. Now in this case, that last hop is also just a fee basically, right? So maybe it's like slightly above, like there's like a small spread maybe of the USD BTC price, liquidity or whatever else, but for your wallet, it's basically just another fee, right? So there's no concern about like synchronizing the rate or anything like that. So I think that makes it very easy just to roll out in a decoupled manner because you only need the edges to update, right? So if the merchant updates, that's fine. They give me an invoice, I can pay. I have a normal stock Bitcoin wallet, that's fine. The other way around, maybe I've updated and they have a normal stock Lightning Network wallet as well. It'll still work like that as well. So.
Yeah, and I think one other thing, just to make it clear for listeners, because there'll be some listeners who are like, oh, F stablecoins and fiat coins, I just want Bitcoin only. But I think the other point, and I was chatting with Ryan from your team as well, and I think the point he was trying to make is that it's not necessarily current Bitcoin users who care. It's more like current stablecoin or fiat coin users who might care about this. The idea is that instead of using Tron and Ethereum should
Mhm,
change,
mhm.
they could potentially use like a Lightning kind of routing to do
Yeah,
this
exactly.
similar
And
feature.
yeah, so now, we're able to sort of like bring them into the ecosystem, right? And the other thing as well is like, once you have sort of like these stablecoins issued, on Bitcoin using Taproot Assets as well, like things like swaps would become a lot easier, basically non-custodial, trust minimized swap, right? So now all of a sudden they come on board, maybe they have like a, fiat front end, Bitcoin back end, and they're like, oh, what's this Bitcoin thing? Let me sort of like, ease more into that as well too. So maybe they're coming in just from the transactional perspective, but then they realize like, oh, actually this thing is a really cool sort of value. I can actually like maybe save in this as well. So I think it also helps sort of like, make the on and off ramps less steep. Because anytime you're talking to people that are maybe doing remittances or other things like that in, other countries, they always talk about the cost basically to get in and out, right? You have all the number of foreign exchange fees, banking stuff, whatever else, but if you can basically onboard someone onto the chain, maybe they're using a slightly different, currency or asset or something like that itself, but then once they're on the chain, it's easy to get Bitcoin and they're in the ecosystem. So I view it as basically a way to also like expand the pie and let people have a gradual way of onboarding basically, because maybe they need this for transactional purposes because maybe they're, they need like faster turnover, but then eventually you can even imagine like a wallet that's, okay, well, maybe I start off with 20% Bitcoin, 80%, fiat, and then I slide it over more. So I think this can basically be a more gradual way of onboarding people onto Bitcoin generally.
I see.
Yeah.
So I guess the main kind of challenge, the way I'm thinking about it, obviously you're the technical guy, it's not the regulatory kind of expert or whatever, but I'm curious, does that present more of a challenge at the LSP level, the stable coin or fiat coin offerer? Like, does it mean they are exposing themselves now because they're doing more like a dollar kind of operation? I'm curious if you have any thought there.
Yeah, good question. I mean, so like, the people that are issuing, you can say that maybe they're the existing players in the space, right? That are already sort of like, they're already doing this stuff. They already know what they need to do in different, regions. And also like, this is like their business and they figure that stuff out itself, right? But then, as far as the nodes, once again, the nodes that are doing this, it's a purely optional thing basically. And it'll be sort of like, up to them once again to like navigate exactly what's going on. There is another component, for example, say anyone that's already using Lightning Network on the network today, they're basically long Bitcoin, right? Everyone's holding Bitcoin, they're long Bitcoin the entire time. But in this case, because like they're getting an HTLC that may be within one USD, in this direction, and then Bitcoin in the other direction, now their exposure is slightly different, right? So I think people that have done this stuff professionally, like they're market makers, they know how to use things like options and futures to hedge things out as well. I think in the future there'll be other packages for these, maybe people that are doing on a more less industrial, less more hobbyist level, basically, to have similar sort of hedging structures. For example, just now there was a talk here talking about things like DLCs as well. You can imagine I can basically have like another off-chain DLC that's sort of like an option, right? That I can use to make sort of like a structured product to make sure even though I'm doing all these other HTLC types or whatever else, I'm still net long Bitcoin. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's another cool sort of like way we can sort of like expand the role of these individuals, or rather, the opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs as well to provide those solutions, because this is something that people know very well how to use options to basically hedge a portfolio and to make sure they're getting particular exposure in one direction or another, and then you can apply those techniques into this domain as well.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So it's really interesting to see what happens with it. I understand there'll be some users who are like, I don't want this, I don't need it, but at the end of the day, I mean, you can't stop it, right? It's on the Lightning Network. It's just out there, right?
Yeah.
So it's there, and for better or worse, and I think the way I'm seeing it is like, I can't hate on stablecoin users if I have a USD bank account, right? Like,
sure,
it's kind of let he who has no USD bank account cast the first stone. That's how I'm seeing it.
It's about access,
Yeah. So I think it's kind of, even if you don't care about stablecoins yourself, it's going to be, maybe there's going to be more Lightning Network users from this.
Well, exactly. And like I was saying, like, so let's say, we're routing, this thing takes off and there's a bunch of more activity. This means more routing activity for routing nodes as well, which means now they're going to be making more money as well. And now you have like a flywheel where maybe now they can reinvest more capital in the Lightning Network itself. We'll see more growth in the total capacity and more users. And also now, like, anything can plug into this sort of like, currency agnostic, routing network basically. It's all still denominated in Bitcoin. So I think that also like, adds to the network effects as well too, where even though they're not necessarily like, holding it themselves, they have something else at the edges, everything's still denominated in Bitcoin. And this also like gradually lets people, make that journey from, store of value to medium of exchange, unit of account, basically. I think that's a very interesting component.
Gotcha. And just speaking to more Bitcoin, more broadly, and Lightning development, I'm curious if you have any view on kind of where the soft fork conversation is at, the scalability. Some people are interested in Opcodes, some people want APO, L-enhanced. There's this new idea of great script restoration. I'm curious if what are you kind of interested in, or what's on your mind there?
It's a good question. I would say like, I think like, maybe like 5 or so years ago, I think the question or like kind of like discussion was like, do we even want covenants? Like, how do they work? Aren't they scary? Isn't it like gray goo? It's going to sort of like consume all my Bitcoin, things like that. I think people got educated and they're okay, well, me as a Bitcoin user, I make my address. When I make my address, I have the spending conditions basically. So someone can't force me to accept the covenant. I mean, like they can force me to try to take my Bitcoin, but that's like a whole other thing, the whole rubber hose attack basically. But you're not necessarily going to accidentally accept the covenant and all of a sudden it destroys all your Bitcoin like a virus and something like that, right? So I think people got over that. Now I think the discussion is sort of like, okay, well, what do we want exactly? How powerful should it be? How does it compose with other components as well? So I think that's a very big step forward, because now it's no longer like, do we want this thing? It's okay, well, this seems really cool. We can basically improve decentralization, self-custody, privacy, and these other aspects as well. And sort of, okay, well, how do we examine these different proposals to sort of like, examine number one, risk, capability, and then also the way they compose with other components as well too. So, so I think that's definitely just exciting. Just people are moving forward, and like, it's a slow process because it's decentralized. There's no one figure that's just saying, hey, this is the roadmap. That's it. You're sort of like figuring it out, in the commons over time, and I think that's the beauty of of Bitcoin generally. But yeah, I would say I'm just excited about just about all of them, because I think people need to remember that like at the end of the day, like we always want to improve the ability to custody Bitcoin, right? And so some of these techniques to basically make it like, lower the custody costs, also make it less operational intensive, do things like multisig as well too. And if we can increase the privacy and scalability as well, given that we're seeing sort of like, regulatory activity, some of it's indeterminate or whatever else, can we give, users the tools basically to make sure their Bitcoin is secure, and then also to use it in a decentralized way as well. I think it's very important. But yeah, I would say definitely a few of them. Like one that, people like a lot is like, this cat thing basically, which I think is interesting because like, if you look at the code for it, it's pretty trivial, right? It's sort of like one of the first things people learn in programming is, okay, well, how do you do like string manipulation basically? Because everything is based on parsing. For example, HTTP, the web, it's all text, right? And I think we also learned with all these this new AI stuff, it's all text again, right? So it's a very powerful and fundamental concept. So I think it's interesting in that like with just that one that one small operation, it allows for many other additional capabilities in itself, and maybe some of them are maybe like less efficient than the other ones. But people are concerned about like the code surface area and like the complexity in that one's at least fairly contained, right? And there's something called Bitcoin Signet, like Bitcoin acquisition, basically, where people are starting to enable these things in the wild now, right? So I think this is sort of like a proving period now. It's like, hey, if there's really some crazy ultra DOS type something like that, people can try it out here and actually start to move forward on it itself. But there are a bunch of other things, and one thing that was announced or like unveiled is something called the Great Script Registration in Austin in BC++. And so one thing so for example, like opcat basically takes two strings and combines them, right? There's another opcode that was also disabled called like op substring. So let's say you have a string and you only want the first few characters, right, for parsing once again. So the question is, okay, well, why that one and not this one, right? It's sort of like a chicken and the egg thing as far as like, okay, well, we playing favorites or whatever else. Great Script Registration says, okay, well, hey, let's just do everything. Let's just do all of the prior stuff that we had, things that were in the original code base, not necessarily entirely new operations. Basically, it's not like a new crypto system or whatever else. Yeah. Let's do all that stuff, but at the same time, let's try to make sure that like we're not going to increase the validation cost of the system, right? Let's make sure.
The SIGOps versus VAROps concept.
Exactly.
So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how do we make sure that's safe, because there'll be a lot of users and people out there who are like, it sounds good, but how do I make sure it's safe?
Yeah. I think that's the thing too. It's like, it tries to sort of like compromise by increasing scope, almost in a sense, and maybe that there. But I think people can do things like simulations. I think they can also use sort of like formal methods to sort of like try to like analyze and describe the system and something, things like, ALO or ATLA plus to basically gain additional confidence. Maybe not something as hardcore as like the simplicity where it's like fully firmly proven. This is more that, okay, well, I input this stuff and they can't find a counter example basically that can still increase confidence. But so I think it's just sort of like, a matter of time and confidence to be increased as well. And obviously that thing is still somewhat young. There's not necessarily like a full BIP of anything like that. There's sort of like, there's some code, which is really good. And there's also like the talk that he gave as well. But I think generally what I'm excited about is sort of like reinvigorating that excitement amongst developers basically. I think also the recognition from individuals as well as that, hey, like we need to make sure people can make the most decentralized systems as possible, right? Because otherwise, if all we have are somewhat more concentrated or centralized architectures, those can become single points of failure basically, right? So I think that can be like a rallying cry to move forward to make sure people can custody their own Bitcoin, they have additional privacy solutions, and also we have additional sort of like scalability tools, because at the end of the day, they all have some trade-offs basically, right? So we don't want maybe like, can we sort of like compose many of them together, or even just keep people other options depending on their own, risk profile or use case as well. So.
Yeah, interesting. I think that'll be where the debate is. There'll be, and I can understand the reason for people who want to be conservative and say, not so fast.
Yeah. Because you said, number one, don't fuck up the money, right? That's number one rule, any of this stuff. And I think people can't forget that basically, because, that would be the disaster case. And like, slow is better than fast, and then things just start to break down basically. And once you lose confidence as well too, I think that's the thing where it's like Bitcoin has gained more and more confidence globally. Some of these traditional capital markets in the U.S. and Hong Kong and other areas as well. There's more eyes on it, right? So that also increases the stakes as well too. That increases the level of confidence that you need, and also the level of rigor of your engineering practices as well too. So it's sort of like getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that can be a challenge as well, because some people feel like, okay, well, because we haven't done something for a while, maybe like we want to make up for lost time, right? But then it's like, okay, well, you can do that, but at the same time, let's make sure like we're not trying to just do something too quickly for the sake of doing something as well. And so definitely a very difficult conversation, but I think you can basically iterate towards the best solution, sort of like within the marketplace, within the commons, and that's part of like basically like the market and decentralization, which is the beautiful thing about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So
Great. Okay, well, yeah, guys, check out Lightning Labs. I'll put the links in the show notes. And Laolu, thanks for joining me.
cool, yeah, thank you.
Hey guys, we're back at Bitcoin Seoul 2024. I'm here with my friend Saifedean, the author of many books, The Bitcoin Standard, and also of Saifedean.com. And now I know you had an interesting, so this is your talk at the Canadian Bitcoiner Conference, and also went out as an episode on the podcast. I'll put that in the link. But basically you had this idea of basically explaining the central bank more like a private organization. So could you just touch on that for a little bit?
Yeah, I think one big misconception people have about the Austrian critique of socialism is the idea that socialism fails because of incentives, or socialism fails because of size, because of scale. A lot of people think this is the case. A lot of people think central planning is a problem because people don't want to work if they can't get rich. That's to an extent a real problem in socialism, but it's not really the economic problem of socialism. First of all, there are effective ways of motivating people other than profit. If you tell them, I'm not going to put you, if you tell them you'll put them in a gulag, they're going to have a very strong incentive to work. Not going to the gulag is more valuable to people than getting rich, right? Yeah. So that is a very strong way to solve the incentive problem. On the other hand, the scale issue is really not the problem with central planning. You can't have central planning in a tiny country like Estonia. Socialism fails in Estonia. But you can have planning for a gigantic corporation like Amazon, which has more employees than Estonia has people, and serves about 300 million customers around the world. And yet they managed to get the toothpaste out to every one of their customers when they want it, within a few hours or a few days. So they clearly know how to plan. They're making a profit. It's huge. They employ 500,000 people. They know what they're doing. So the issue, and this is a misconception of Austrian economics, because the Austrian critique of socialism is independent of the issue of size and independent of the issue of incentives. It is specifically about economic calculation. This is the key point. You are unable to have economic calculation in a world in which there is no private property, because under socialism, the government owns all the capital. So therefore, there is no market for capital. There is no possibility for people to perform economic calculation because there are no prices, because the owner of all capital goods is the same. So to try and simplify it with an example, the iron mines and the copper mines and the car factory and the train factory that use the copper and iron mines are all owned by the same person. So there is no market in copper and iron between the train factory and the car factory, and there's no market between consumers between trains and cars, because the government, the central planner, decides who gets to drive a car and who gets to get on a train. So every level, the decision is being made top down. At every level, there is no private property. The people are owned by the government. The car factory and the train factory are owned by the government, and the copper and iron mines are owned by the government. So the government can't make a market between itself. You need to have a market. Market is not a pretend play thing. Government can't LARP a market. They can't, as Mises puts it, they need to have a market. They need to have people who have to make a real concrete choice between getting on a car and getting on a train. And when you have that, the car factory and the train factory can make concrete choices about how much they're willing to pay for the resources. And then the one that uses it most productively gets that. It's a little bit of a long diatribe, but the point I'm trying to get to is ultimately it's an issue of property. So usually Austrians apply this analysis to central banks and say this is why central banking fails, this is why central planning in the capital market fails. But I think if we're being really honest, I think this is a misconception, and I think the Austrians might be wrong about this, because the central bank is a private institution. So the marketing for the central bank is that it is a public institution. There's a hilarious page on the Federal Reserve's website where they say, well, who owns the Federal Reserve? And it's these kind of, you're very familiar with the kind of debunking that you see in mainstream media outlets, that they'll lay things out and just admit that the thing they're debunking is true, but then tell you, but it's false anyway. So they go on about, no, actually nobody owns the Fed, and it's an organization by the government, blah, blah, blah. And then they mention that there are the shareholders, and then they mention the word dividends. If there are dividends, that means there are shareholders. If there are shareholders, there are owners.
It's private, yeah.
It is a private bank. It's got a monopoly from the government, but it is privately owned. The owners of the Federal Reserve are the constituent banks of the Federal Reserve. It's an oligopoly. And this has been the case since the establishment of the Federal Reserve. So therefore, the owners of the Federal Reserve are able to perform economic calculation because there are resources. Yes, they have a monopoly, and yes, it's not optimal to have a monopoly, obviously, for you and me, but it is optimal for them. Yeah, but monopolies can perform economic calculation. If there is private property, just because the government puts a gun to the head of somebody else and tells them you can't set up a business that competes with this guy, does not mean that you are unable to perform economic calculation. You still, as a monopoly, you have resources and you are able to perform economic calculation. And so, if you think of it this way, it does make sense that central banking is working exactly as intended.
Just not for us.
Just not for you, but it is working for them. But that's the point. You know, a monopoly in any context ends up serving its owners at the expense of the customers.
Yeah.
Every single kind of monopoly.
I sort of go back and forth here when I'm thinking about it. I mean, I can agree with parts of it. Obviously, I agree that it does. They don't work for us, but there are kind of some semblance, or as you said, it's a public entity. People talk about Federal Reserve, central bank independence, and yet the government selects the governor, right? And this kind of Trump or Biden may make overtures about trying to influence the actions of the Federal Reserve. So there's kind of some element there. There's also kind of a propaganda element, like the government sort of propagandizes us, the tax cattle, into holding government bonds. Now, of course, you know, we don't recommend holding government bonds, but many people do. And so they kind of end up being bag holders because of propaganda, because of coercion. So for you, I guess for you, what you're trying to point to the fact that it's more about the coercive element, that people got kind of coercively pushed into the system, like it wasn't chosen by the market, obviously.
Yeah, this is a very important point. I think the most devastating argument against Keynesian voodoo is that there was never at any point in time some Keynesian scientist who came up and said, we have figured out that actually we can make the world better by getting off the gold standard. And then they wrote a book or launched a campaign to do this. And then they got somebody
to accept it, yeah.
You got people to accept it. They voted somebody into office who ran on a platform of we're going to go off the gold standard, and people voted for them, and then they went off the gold standard, and they appointed a bunch of Keynesian pedophiles in charge of the monetary policy instead. That never happened. The pedophiles took over without having anything. In fact, what actually happened was, first of all, we are on the gold standard. We're not going off the gold standard. Don't believe the liars who tell you that we are going off the gold standard. Then, okay, we're on the gold standard, but you can't have your gold.
Only
Because
central banks
of
can
reasons.
redeem it. And then
Yeah, well,
eventually
you
not
know,
even
with
they
this
can
world
redeem it.
war and it's
Yeah.
complicated, and so we're still on the gold standard. Don't believe them. We will never go off the gold standard, but you just can't have your gold for a bit. And then, oh, well, actually, we're going to have to suspend the gold standard for a bit, but don't worry, we're going to be back on the gold standard. Don't believe the liars who tell you we're not going back on the gold standard. And then, oh, wait, actually, we've just discovered that it's better that we don't go on the gold standard. So they went off the gold standard in 1914 and 1915, and that continued. And Keynes wrote his moronic book in 1936. That was 21 years later. So it was a justification for something that had already happened. They'd already been off the gold standard. He just came up with the 21-year late justification for it. So there is no moral or legal or intellectual case to be made for this being anything other than criminal theft. It has been forced on people, and it was a lie. It was lying from day one. They lied about it. And in the Fiat Senate discussed the auction of the bonds to finance the World War I. They failed to sell 2/3 of those bonds. And what this Bank of England did was they bought these bonds themselves. They put them under the name of two individuals who worked for the Bank of England. They bought it with a credit line from the Bank of England, and that's how the Bank of England financed the war. And that's why they had to go off the gold standard, because they'd made so much money that they couldn't redeem all of the liabilities that they made, because they printed a ton of money in order to buy the equity. So I think ultimately the whole thing is resting on lies and coercion. But I think it's counterproductive perhaps to think of it as a government bureaucracy that is failing because it is central planning, because all of these, they're just like these Soviet bureaucrats who are trying to make the steel factory work, but they are unable to make it work, and they don't know why they end up with a lot of rusting steel factory. That's not the case here. We don't have rusting steel factories. We have very successful debt slave production factories that are making people into debt slaves for the owners of the banking cartel. And it's working very well for the banking cartel. They keep getting richer, they keep getting better off. And I think if you look at where they stand with relation to the policies of the Federal Reserve, it's been massively successful. When there's inflation, they are, when monetary policy is loose, they are the largest creditors, and so they are getting their liabilities devalued, so they're better off. The largest creditors are the banks, and so the banks are better off from the devaluation of the money. Then when there is an increase in interest rates, when monetary policy becomes less accommodative, well, then they are still able to borrow at the lowest rates because they are the banks, they have the primary dealer relationship with the Federal Reserve, and they are doing much better than everybody else. Everybody else starts getting liquidated and businesses start going out of business, and people need to sell their assets at a massive discount. And who is best placed to be able to capitalize on that? People who are able to get the lowest interest rate. And so even though interest rates rise, they rise for everybody, and so the people who get the lowest interest rate still get the lowest interest rate. And so these owners of the bank end up succeeding, end up benefiting enormously from this rug pull of raising interest rates, because everybody gets liquidated, and then they get to decide who gets to keep their business, who gets bailed out, who has to get liquidated, who gets to sleep on the street, who gets to keep their house. And so it allows them obviously to buy all these important assets at a discount, but also it allows them an enormous amount of political power, and you can see this becoming more and more obvious. Basically, nobody who is going to be disobedient to the regime is allowed to continue to operate. If your business is in trouble and you're obedient to the regime, you get a bailout. If your business is not in trouble and you're not disobedient, you don't get a bailout. So I think it's a sweet deal. My actionable advice for you is to be born to a family that owns a central bank. If you didn't do that, better luck next time, I guess.
Better get some Bitcoin.
Yeah, better. Hopefully there's reincarnation. Maybe you get another go at this.
Well, I mean, yeah, so it's an interesting, let's say, reinterpretation or reframing of the view. I think, to your point, it is very political in the sense that it depends who gets the bailout, right? When things crash, the government chooses who gets it. This bank gets a bailout, that one doesn't. Or this airline gets a bailout. American Airlines gets a bailout, that other one doesn't. You know? So there's an element in which it's political control, it's government seizing and commandeering the resources of society. And so, I mean, I guess, you bring all that together, we kind of are tax cattle or we're debt slaves, but really it all comes back to Bitcoin, doesn't it, right? Like this is actually the real way to opt out. It's the only way, isn't it?
Absolutely. Ultimately, the only way to get out of this is Bitcoin. I mean, that's really the actionable advice out of it. The fiat is a rigged game, and I think trying to think from the perspective of this being about bureaucrats who are unable to succeed in their job is very counterproductive. It's you're playing into their frame. You are giving them your energy. You're giving them your money. You are holding your money into the system. The more emotionally invested you are, the more financially invested you must be, and that's the wrong thing. You just need to opt out, and the way to opt out is Bitcoin. And not just opt out. With Bitcoin, you beat them, because I think this is the really key thing about why Bitcoin eventually wins in the long run, because I honestly think holding Bitcoin is going to be far more profitable than running a central banking cattle debt slavery system, which is what we have right now. So yeah, you can make a lot of money from that, but I still think holding Bitcoin is probably better. So I think Bitcoiners will likely outperform the fiat mafia, and hopefully, I think over time, that's what's going to kill it.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. Everyone check out Saifedean's work. He's over at saifedean.com. Check out his books, The Bitcoin Standard, The Fiat Standard, and Principles of Economics. Saif, thank you for joining me.
Cheers, man. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Back to the show in a moment. This show also brought to you by Nomad Capitalist. Nomad Capitalist is a leading provider in terms of offshore tax and lifestyle strategy planning and implementation. They can help you go overseas and legally lower your taxes. As many of you know, I grew up in Australia, but I left. I was sick of it in terms of the taxes and the COVID tyranny and all these other things. And so that's why I left, and now I live in Dubai. But that's not necessarily the place for you. You have to think exactly what works for you, for your family, for your business. And Nomad Capitalists have worked across dozens of different countries. They've helped people get passports, residences, bank accounts, and all kinds of other things. And importantly, it's not just about choosing one place. It may be multiple places. And it may be also about making the pieces fit together in terms of how your business fits with your family and you as an individual. Nomad Capitalists have helped many people in terms of going overseas. And if you're interested, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. This is applicable for people with a net worth above $1 million. That's nomadcapitalist.com/apply. The lead sponsor of this show is Swan.com, and Swan has a mission to onboard millions of people into Bitcoin. I also work at Swan, helping on some educational content for the team. Now, the team have also put out a new version of the Swan Bitcoin application, which is available on your smartphone, whether it's Apple or Android. Now, this app has a really fast onboarding experience. It's now just a few minutes to go from zero to Bitcoin. So if you are standing there with your family or friends and you might have been having trouble trying to get them onboarded, well, try this now. Recommend Swan Bitcoin. And you can do this while you're standing next to them. They can click through, and most of them will be able to set up and do this in just a few minutes. Also, the team at Swan have rolled out a new promotion. There are 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys. So this is a great way to go from zero to Bitcoin, and in a guided and managed way. So reminder, go to your App Store or Play Store and search Swan Bitcoin to get onboarded with Bitcoin today. And now, back to the show.
Hi everyone, we're here at Bitcoin Seoul 2024. I'm here with Obi from Fedi. So let's chat a little bit about what's happening. What's the latest in terms of Fedi? What's happening?
Well, we just yesterday released a major release of Fedi that we've been working on behind the scenes for several months. So that's really big for us. It has a lot of features. One of the biggest is that we've now got a global chat. So instead of different chats for different communities, it's one contiguous chat. So that sort of completes the vision of this being a community super app, because you can now chat with anyone, anywhere, within your community or others, and you can access multiple federations to help custody your money, and you have all the features of Fedimint all in one place. So it's this final community run and operated super app. So we're really excited about that.
And let's chat a little bit about your, I guess, who do you see as the main users or groups who are going to adopt this?
So there's Fedimint and then there's Fedi. For Fedi as a company, we're very focused on market product fit. So we have really strong relationships within the humanitarian and human rights defender communities, and also in Bitcoin communities in the global south. And so the number of communities they support in combination is multiple billions. And so that's the market we are focused on. But they're the world's most disempowered. We say instead of focusing on the world's wealthy, which is great, there's no problem with that, we focus on the world's worthy.
Yeah. When it comes to Fedi, so my understanding is there's this concept of guardians, and they are the, let's say, the key holders, but you also are connected to a Lightning gateway or multiple Lightning gateways, and that's how the eCash is kind of traveling on the Lightning network. So could you just explain a bit about what responsibilities the guardians have and how many guardians you see being involved with a typical Fedi instance?
So you can have as few as 4. I mean, it is possible to run a single guardian federation, but then it's not a federation anymore.
Yeah.
So where it starts becoming useful is at 4, and you can be more. We've seen people have experiments up to 40 of these. So that's more than twice as many as you have in the Liquid Federation, for example, at that stage. Yeah. And the responsibility is to download the Fedimint software and run it on a server. And running the Fedimint software is actually relatively simple. There are some partnerships that we have with companies that make it very easy for you to set up and run your own federation. And then they will provide you this point and click interface to set up and run your own federation. And that can take as little as 10 minutes. But once it's running, you then need to run it in the same way you run a Bitcoin node. It just needs to, you need to keep it fed and watered with internet and electricity. Yeah. If it goes wrong, you restart it. Yeah. You know?
And then in terms of the role that Guardian plays, like they are also the person that somebody who's lost their wallet or their phone, they come to them to get recovered. Like it's a recovery function as well, right? Like what kind of roles are they playing in the community?
Again, it depends on the community.
Yeah.
So if it's a very large community, they probably won't provide that service. But then people can still individually, just like with a Bitcoin wallet, you can, once you have your eCash, it's on your phone, so you can back that up with 12 words and recover yourself without any involvement with the guardians. And some guardians may not want to do that. But if it's a small community, if it's your family or friends or a football club or something like that, where people sort of know people know each other by eye and so on, they can use KYG, know your guardian.
Yeah.
And it's basically knowing your friend, knowing your family, and you can use that to recover. And that provides you a really powerful addition in terms of how to back up and recover your keys.
Yeah. And so I guess everything has different trade-offs and there's different trust models and so on. But can you offer people just a rough idea, what kind of fees should they expect? It's like zero holding costs, but you're paying on the fee out, or like what kind of fees would the end user pay?
So the end user will pay a fraction of a percentage or free for transactions within a federation. And so you should think about that like within your community, like within your town, moving around on the streets and so on, you can go by bicycle and by foot. So it's basically free or very low cost. But then if you want to travel between towns and between cities, between countries, you have to start using planes and trains and automobiles, and the cost could be higher. So that's when you're starting to use the Lightning Network. And so if you're sending money outside of the federation to buy something, for example, on a site like Bitrefill or to send a zap to someone in Nostr, you can do that from within your federation, but you'll pay the Lightning fee. And that will be, the classic Lightning fee cost. But if you're buying something within the federation with eCash, then it could be anywhere from 0 to a fraction of the cost for the Lightning.
Right, and as we're saying, the idea is Lightning is kind of the connecting, it's the glue, everyone's going to use that.
It's the motorways connecting to the towns, and you can think about the towns and cities as the federations or the Fedimints, and then Lightning is the glue that connects them together.
Yeah. Okay, and so I guess the other aspect is I know there's different modules that can be part of a Fedi instance. And so one example might be for people who really want stable coin, or I prefer to call it fiat coin, or maybe stable value. I understand that's something you're looking at also as maybe one of the modules.
Yeah, so, well, you talked about the backup. So social backup and recovery is actually a Fedimint module that was added beyond the basic Fedimint protocol.
Yeah.
Fedi added that module to allow communities to back up keys or other data in future on behalf of community members, and then use guardians to collectively, if a majority of them say this is the right person, to allow them to get that data back. The obvious use case would be for keys. Another module that has been discussed is a federated mining pool, where you can have a mining pool using any protocol you want, for example, Stratum v2, but no single person running it, and you can run that. So Fedimints are actually a way of running any application in a federated manner, if you think it's useful to run in a federated manner. Another thing could be a federated stable value asset. And there was a coding hackathon competition done a year and a half ago, in fact, actually, more than that. It was in 2022 that we held. And one of the winners for that, the winner for that created an idea of a contract for difference, a stable value, stabilized Bitcoin effectively. And so we've taken that on and improved the product, and that's being trialed by certain communities. And so that's another example. But people are working on federated escrow services, so dispute resolution. But instead of having one escrow, one person in the middle, one sort of adjudicator or judge to determine who's doing right or wrong, you can have a group of experts on the subject who provide a federated judgment and the majority decision, which again, in legal disputes, you might prefer multiple people deciding, not just one person who could be bribed by one party or another.
Yeah.
And the list goes on and on.
Yeah. Okay. And let's chat a little bit about the trust model. Now, of course, it is kind of, choose your own trust model. If you can afford to go on chain, not your keys, not your coins, all that.
Yes.
But do you want to just explain a little bit about, how you're thinking about, the risk of getting rugged, right? Like, could, let's say a quorum of the Guardians run away with the money? Like, how are you thinking about that kind of risk and, I guess, communicating that for users?
So yeah, this is a really interesting one. So I ran an exchange for nearly a decade, and we were the only exchange in the world to do something called proof of reserves every month from the time of joining to starting to finishing. So proof of reserves is something that Nick Carter wrote about it a lot, etc. It's something that's been near and dear to my heart. So if you look at Fedimint, the actual protocol, there's a really good website if you want to learn more about Fedimint, which is a protocol that Fedi relies upon, plus Bitcoin, plus Lightning, plus Matrix now, and also Nostr. We rely on all these freedom technologies. There's a really good site which goes through it and explains how it works, but also talks about all the trade-offs and all the risks. And one of them is this risk you mentioned. And so we wrote about the ability to do effectively automated bank runs, proof of reserve type actions, I think about nearly 2 years ago. So it's all public, and that's something that it's complicated to do, but we know it's possible to do. So then in time, the ultimate best way to protect yourself from any of these risks is, one, to have good trust for the people that you connect to. This is why we prefer the federated approach, and we prefer focusing on communities of trust versus, because in your requirements for trust is lower. If you know the people that are part of the community, there's a social cost for them to rug pull you. And also they cannot rug pull you individually. The privacy properties mean they have to rug pull everybody. So if you're in a community and there's 4 guardians and a community of 10,000 people, they have to rug pull all 10,000. Then, they will take a lot of risk. Whereas if they're we like to say a curly-haired guy in the Bahamas who's a stranger, you're going to end up having a bad day potentially. So that is actually a powerful mechanism. The second is the privacy requirement requires you to rug pull everybody or no one. And then third, ultimately, you can you leave the federation, and that's the only way you know for sure. And so you can imagine in time, tools could be implemented to help you automatically, so like en masse. Yeah. You could be part of multiple federations, and at some point in time, you can coordinate, and everybody en masse leaves. And because the Guardians won't know when that event will necessarily happen, it also acts as a risk. Yeah. They won't know. There's a risk for them to try and be fractional, because at any moment, it's like this Damocles sword of this mass migration could happen.
And also interesting, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this also, is that the Lightning gateways who connect to the Fedi, they are also placing a certain level of trust in the eCash tokens of that Fedi. So they those Lightning gateway guys need to find a way to get trust in the Fedi too. So that's kind of also another kind of...
So trust is actually really interesting. So one thing to be clear, it's not trustless. It's trust reduced, but it's nowhere near trust minimized to the level of self-custody. So if you can do that, you should do that. But you have to compare it. We like to compare it more against using a centralized custodial solution, and it's this sort of journey from the most trusted to the least trusted, and we're on that journey. However, it's actually quite interesting, because then trust acts like a limit on how large these things can get, and it naturally decentralizes it, so that you never see these becoming these behemoths with hundreds of millions of users. That is the potential for something like a Coinbase to become. And you can see this future where there will be, as they get above a certain size, they naturally split off into multiple smaller communities, and there'll be right now there are dozens, and in future there will be hundreds, and we can see a vision eventually in 3-4 years time where there are hundreds of thousands of federations where people are holding balances across them, and you have this nice, simple, contiguous experience, but actually your money is being decentralized.
Yeah, so fascinating stuff. So guys, check out Fedi. I'll put the links in the show notes. And Obi, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Hey guys, so we're here at Bitcoin Seoul 2024. I'm here with my friend Jimmy Song. So Jimmy, let's chat a little bit. What do you think about the conference so far? What are your thoughts on Bitcoin Seoul?
Well, I mean, this is sort of like a major milestone for the people of Korea, right? Because they've been shitcoining for so long, and this is like the first signs of life of the real narrative coming through. Savings, and East Asia has a lot of like savings heavy sort of culture, and they want to save. They just don't have a very good vehicle. So
Yeah.
I think when they get it, this will blow up, and you'll see a lot of people getting into it. It's going to be a major growth area in this region. So yeah.
So are there any big developments you see in this, in the Korean market, or anything you've kind of heard from people?
I mean, it's sort of still emerging from the stupidity of something like Luna. So and that to me is like the absolute bottom of all that they experience, and I hopefully learned their lesson, and it's starting to recover from that, and this is part of that sort of revival. So I now specific stuff I haven't heard yet, but we'll see. There's plenty of potential.
Any thoughts, like if you're just kind of thinking about Bitcoin more broadly, technical developments, what do you kind of what's interesting for you in the technical world of Bitcoin?
Yeah, a lot of interesting things going on. I mean, I think Jeremy Rubin just had this really interesting blog post about like a trusted setup, and then you can have any confidence you want. And I think it takes some of the similar ideas from like BitVM and stuff like that. But that to me is the most interesting is, if you do have something like BitVM, I think something that a lot of people don't realize is that you have a lot of privacy around the smart contract itself, because most of it is hidden, and you don't know what the executing program is. As far as you know, it's just some sort of random Taproot spend. You don't actually know what's going on. So, that's the main sort of like direction of okay, what can we do with this thing? Because you can perform kind of almost any arbitrary program execution and prove that it executed correctly or didn't execute it correctly. So that's the main thing that interests me right now. It's very early, obviously, and it's going to be a few years before we even really realize what it's for. But for the long-term health of Bitcoin, I see this as one of the major sort of like benefits or security things or something like that will prove itself over time. Yeah.
Great. What about savings culture here in Korea? That's something I think you were talking on earlier. Could you elaborate a bit on savings culture here and how that could tie in with Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I grew up here the first 8 years of my life, and so I have some familiarity with that. And this is not necessarily something Western audiences would know, but Koreans are hugely into savings, even before the advent of banks and stuff. So they would have, for example, these things called 개. And they're basically groups of people that contribute some fixed amount of money, like on a monthly basis or something like that. And one person gets it every month, a different person, right? And you do like some sort of round robin or something like that. And that's been a part of the culture for a very long time. And in fact, like my dad always tells me this story about how he was able to get an engagement ring for my mom because he drew the number 1 in his thing, and he got the money. Now he can afford the ring. And this is sort of like an enforced way of saving without like, government forcing you to take away some social security part of your check or something like that. It was meant to be sort of like a communal thing where now you can have like a down payment on a house because now it's your turn and you get this windfall, although you're, contributing to everybody else. So, that's the culture we're talking about, where they want to save, right? They want long-term capital formation, and they want communal sort of enforcement on that to make more of that happen. The problem is, like in a savings-based culture with fiat money, you're just stealing from everybody, and that's unfortunately what the government here has done for a long time. So, I see Bitcoin as sort of like fitting hand in glove with the culture that craves savings. There's so many people within Korea that want to save, and I think it's almost part of our DNA. Once like Bitcoin gets to be known as that, I think it takes off like crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's so many exciting things and developments all around the world happening. I think the interesting thing is a lot of the media kind of focuses only on the US world, right? And it's kind of obviously, you're an American, and a lot of the stuff I talk about is from the American world, but actually there's this whole world out there, and it's starting to grow outside of just, the American scene.
That's absolutely correct. And, you underestimate Asia at your own peril. It's a giant population. And if anything catches on here, it's dwarfing anything that happens in Western Europe or the US. So I mean, this is a country that was a little bit late to the game. Really didn't come online with the Bitcoin stuff until the Kimchi premium in 2017. So you figure they're like 5-6 years behind everywhere else. And you can kind of see the seeds of maximalism really being planted here, and that's the thing that matters, right? Store of value savings, using it as better money rather than a gambling vehicle, and that's what I'm hoping for, and that's what it seems like. It's that's the growth edge here, and it can be very, very powerful once it takes root.
Fantastic. Well, everyone check out Jimmy's work. He's the author of Programming Bitcoin, and I'll put all his links in the show notes. So Jimmy, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks, Stefan. I've never done this before, so it's pretty cool.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it out there with your family and friends. Check out my website at stefanlivera.com, and I will see you in the Citadels.